Hello everyone, my name is Chelsea and I'm a psychology major here at Westminster College.
My name is Alondra and I am an education major at Westminster College.
My name is Katie and I'm a psychology major attending Westminster College as well.
I'm Michaella and I'm studying philosophy at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City.
And under the mentorship of Dr. Jonathan Amberge, we are studying the impact of COVID-19, specifically experiences of COVID-19 and a comparison of traits, coping styles, and the effects of social isolation during the pandemic.
Knowing we would likely never get the chance to research something as current and relevant to the entire world, we decided to focus our project on a few different constructs and their correlation to various individual personality traits while people have been in social isolation during the pandemic.
The mass orders of social isolation and social distancing during a pandemic are not unique in their own sense, but very few studies have been done on the effects of this kind of social isolation. Most of the available information comes from studies on individual quarantine. We are interested in what coping mechanisms and traits may affect different factors of social isolation during the pandemic.
It's important to understand how people are adjusting to and coping with social isolation. Having more information on these changes allows increased awareness and would assist in the creation of resources that could significantly improve the lives of individuals in both present and future situations.
Our research question is, how do individual differences in temperament and coping styles correlate with perceived stress, loneliness, and health and wellness during the COVID-19 pandemic while experiencing sheltering in place and social distancing?
Loneliness is defined as the negative emotion arising from a discrepancy between an individual's actual social network and their desired social network. Loneliness is known to be associated with unnatural increases in cortisol patterns, and cortisol is a stress hormone, and these aberrant patterns can disrupt sleep, immune function, and cognition. Knowing about these adverse effects of loneliness is important, especially in the era of social distancing and isolation.
Stress is a physiological response to a stimulus or a stressor. Stress has been shown to impact mental and physical health. Stress can be an increase in blood pressure, cardiovascular problems, depression, and anxiety, along with many other health-related issues. With the stress caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, we know that this is an important factor to analyze.
According to Watson et al., negative affect refers to a disposition experiencing negative emotional states across situations at time. Individuals who have a tendency towards negative affect feel higher levels of negative emotions such as fear and anxiety.
Attentional control has been defined as the ability to regulate attentional processes by focusing and shifting attention as needed and ignoring distracting stimuli in favor of goal-directed demands.
Delgado et al. In 2018 explained extraversion as the general tendency towards social orientation, positive emotions, and motor activity. Connections have been made in studies taken over periods of time that higher loneliness can lead to development of lower extraversion. Extraversion has also been found to positively correlate with positive affect, meaning the more extroverted a person scores, the more likely they are to respond to life's challenges and others in a positive way. The connection between these has been attributed not just to the quantity of social interactions, but even more so the higher quality in these interactions as well.
Coping styles are ways that individuals deal with stress factors in our lives. Some individuals would rather work on fixing their stressor directly and solving their issue, and this approach is referred to as problem-focused coping. Others may focus on their emotions and indulge in a variety of activities, including hobbies and simple tasks such as listening to music, exercising, or talking to a friend or family member. This latter approach is referred to as emotion-focused coping.
Since the start of the pandemic, the Center for Disease Control and other infectious disease experts have advised the implementation of social distancing and isolation measures in an effort to reduce the spread of COVID-19. Social isolation can be defined as the absence of social interactions, contacts, and relationships with family and friends, with neighbors on an individual level, and with society at large on a broader level.
A study by Brooks et al. In 2020 on quarantined hospital staff showed notable negative side effects such as exhaustion, detachment from others, anxiety, and irritability. While quarantine is an extreme form of social isolation, some of the adverse effects of quarantine may coincide with the varying ways in which individuals may be practicing social isolation.
We use extraversion and other temperaments to see if these traits impact how people are affected by social isolation during the pandemic.
And now for our hypotheses. We found that for the factors of temperament and coping, we hypothesized that individuals who scored higher on extraversion would report more negative emotions than and that individuals who score higher on extraversion are also more likely to use problem-focused coping.
We hypothesized that individuals who score higher on attentional control would be more likely to use problem-focused coping. We also hypothesized that individuals that scored higher on negative affect would report more tendencies towards using emotion-focused coping.
For the factors of stress and loneliness, we hypothesized that individuals who scored higher on the scale of extraversion would report more perceived stress and loneliness during isolation and the pandemic, most likely due to the low quantity and quality of social interactions. We also hypothesized that higher extraversion would report decreases in health and wellness habits, specifically poor eating, worse sleep and exercise, and comparatively more mental fatigue.
We hypothesized that negative affect would positively correlate with perceived stress and loneliness. And lastly, individuals with higher attentional control would report more perceived stress, loneliness, and negative affect. Hypotheses 6 and 8 on this slide are both exploratory hypotheses. We have some basis for these predictions, but supporting research is limited.
Concerning our methodology, our participants are part of a convenient sample of 186 individuals. The survey was distributed through social media and the undergraduate listserv email. Because of this, we cannot guarantee that the participants are representative of the US population.
We surveyed individuals on temperament, coping styles, stress, loneliness, and health and wellness. To measure temperament, our team used the ATQ or Adult Temperament Questionnaire to assess constructs of extraversion, negative affect, and attentional control. Additionally, we used the Big Five as a second measure of extraversion.
To measure stress, we used the PSS-4, or the shortened 4-item version of the perceived stress scale.
Our team also used the select items from the brief COPE inventory, which is the abbreviated 28 questionnaire version of the COPE inventory, to measure ways people cope during stressful events.
To measure loneliness, we used the 3-item loneliness scale and the 6-item version of the Jong Gierveld Loneliness Scale. Both are unidimensional overall loneliness measures.
We also created several questions to measure whether participants have had changes in health and wellness practices, as well as perceived feelings during the pandemic and social isolation. We asked participants to specifically consider the questions on stress and loneliness in terms of the previous month and the pandemic.
All of the measures we used were found to be reliable.
This study was approved by the Westminster College IRB. The survey was conducted using Google Forms, which anonymizes participants.
The data was downloaded and analyzed in SPSS for correlations between stress, loneliness, health and wellness practices, coping styles, and temperament.
Our results are as follows.
Contrary to our hypothesis, we found that those who scored higher towards extraversion were actually more likely to report positive emotions, not negative ones.
We found no connection between the traits of extraversion and specific coping styles, which did not support our hypothesis.
Our data supported our hypothesis that individuals who scored higher on attentional control would be more likely to use problem-focused coping.
Our data supported our hypothesis and showed that individuals that score higher on negative affect would report more tendencies towards using emotion-focused coping.
We expected that individuals that scored higher on extraversion would show higher perceived stress and loneliness due to lower quantity and quality social interactions throughout the pandemic. However, we found that high extraversion actually showed lower perceived stress as well as lower perceived loneliness.
In opposition to our hypothesis, we found that extraversion did not show a connection with healthy eating, physical activity, or sleep. We also found that higher extraversion reported lower levels of mental fatigue.
As we predicted, negative affect positively correlated with perceived stress and loneliness, meaning the higher a person scored on a negative affect scale, the more stress and loneliness they reported.
Lastly, unlike our hypothesis, we found that individuals who scored higher on attentional control reported lower levels of perceived stress, negative emotions, and loneliness. These findings are important for a variety of reasons.
The data and conclusions of this study could add to information when making current and future decisions on community shutdowns. The data can be especially helpful when weighing the physical and mental health consequences of such actions, and it can be of use when creating resources to best assist those with traits that are related to having a more negative response to isolation.
Research that focuses on COVID-19 and the effects of isolation during a pandemic is ongoing, and new studies are being constantly published. We are glad we are able to contribute to this ever-pressing research and add to the information that will be used in the future to make these important decisions and support communities.
We found interesting connections between high attentional control and problem-focused coping, both relating to lower mental fatigue. Research could explore these future research could explore these relationships. Future directions could also include creating specific supports for those more prone to low levels of extraversion, low attentional control, and more emotion-focused coping, which again, all of these showed connections to higher loneliness and higher mental fatigue during the pandemic and isolation.
We recognize that the convenient sample is not representative of the total population. We are aware that college students may represent a large number of participants and that they may face different stressors than other participants' age groups at this time.
Participants in this study were largely white, female, and 20 years of age. These factors could skew some results, and a larger sample size would be needed to verify conclusions made. An increased number of participants from more varied demographics could help solidify the results found in the study as they pertain to the larger population.
This survey specifically asked participants to recall events and feelings from the past month. We realize many people may have a hard time recalling past events and reporting accurately.
The nature of this study is correlational, and we acknowledge that correlation does not equal causation. Our data may only correlate with these factors, but does not attempt to conclude cause and effect relationships. Further research would be needed to determine any such connections. Some participants encountered technical issues with the survey platform that may have limited our collected data. The form of distribution also limited responses to those with reliable internet access.
Lastly, the variable we defined as health and wellness could be too broad, and its subfacets, eating, exercise, and sleep, were all variables that could operate independently of each other and could dramatically differ from one individual to the next, effectively making the health and wellness category impossible to generalize.
Here is a list of resources we used.
We would like to thank the McNair Westminster staff and our 2020 cohort for all their support, as well as the continued guidance of our mentor, Jonathan Ambergy. Thank you for sharing this space with us today. Please reach out to us with any additional questions or for further information on this study.